we come to one of the most controversial parts of the entire Constitution. This is going to cover lessons 8 and 9, and it deals with the 20 powers that the states finally agreed that they would be willing to concede to the federal government. Now, this was a very painful part of the Constitutional Convention making this decision. And so we want to deal with each one of them rather carefully so you'll know the background of each one. Now at the original convention, the Declaration of Independence Convention, you see, they wanted to write a constitution at that time. And they started out, of course, with a very strong constitution, but the more they talked about it, the weaker it got, until finally they decided they just didn't want anything but a federal committee operating. And so you have your blanks there. They didn't even allow for a president or an executive back in 1776 and the next 17 months when they discussed the Articles of Confederation. They didn't allow for any federal courts. Let the states handle all the problems. When we get to Article 3, you'll see how unrealistic that was. And number 3, they didn't want the federal government doing the taxing. They just said, you tell us what you need and we'll get it for you. But did they get it? You remember, they definitely didn't. Tax is number 3. And they didn't give the central government the authority to enforce its own laws. No enforcement power. As a result, the Articles of Confederation were so weak, it almost caused us to lose the Revolutionary War. Now, 11 years later, at the Constitutional Convention, as they began discussing these problems, they realized that delegating authority and power to the federal government was basically dangerous, because central governments historically had always abused power given to them. So they want to be very careful in what they give to the turnover to the Congress. So number 1, they're going to select these powers to give to Congress. That's your blank. Then they're going to fix the boundaries of Congress so as to limit its power. They're going to actually say, this you can do and no more. And then, number 3, they're going to fix the boundaries and limit the authority of the states as well. So that's states. All right, now we come to the most difficult, significant, and delicate thing of all. Listen to this. Article 1, Section 8 begins, the Congress shall have the power to collect taxes, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. There it is. We fought the Revolutionary War over taxes, and now we're going to turn it over. The states finally found it absolutely essential that for the purpose of waging war and carrying out the administrative responsibilities of the central government, they must be allowed to tax. Now, it's interesting that in the New Jersey plan, they try to describe all the different types of taxes. And the founders said, no, we will just generally lay down the idea of taxes consisting of imports, imposts, and the general types of taxes. But for our purposes, we thought we'd identify several of the more important types of taxes so you'll be familiar with them. So here are the principal types of taxes. The federal government isn't using all of them, but they are mentioned in literature, so we should be familiar with them. First of all, a poll tax. Now, a poll tax is a head tax. You see all these people up here? It's saying to them folks, it's going to be $2 per head. And that means, usually poll taxes are very small and often are assigned to pay for the cost of elections. So they will just simply say, look, it's $2 per head, $2 for you, $2 for you, $2 for you. You're a poor man, I know, but it's $2 for everybody, regardless of your circumstances. And you have 2 heads, that's $4 for you. Okay, it's $2 per head. That's what the word poll means. It's not talking about election polls. It comes from a Greek word meaning head. It's a head tax. You count the heads and everybody pays $2 or whatever it is. All right, a property tax is based on the value of what you own. Either your property in the form of real estate or your property in terms of jewelry and private possessions, whatever. And 3, an income tax, of course, is just what it says. It's any gain or income from any source whatever. And it can include wages, business profits, sale of assets, and even money that you've made illegally, like gambling or selling illicit liquor, etc. Of course, if they can prove it. But if they prove that you got the money, you got to pay taxes on it. All right, 4, an excise tax. Now that's a tax on articles of merchandise. Now let me just say something about that. What is the dictionary definition for excise? What does excise mean? It means to cut out. You see the doctor excises a wart, you know? Now people say, ooh, that's exactly what those taxes are. They're just cutting it right out of us. I can just feel it all the time. But that's not where the word excise tax comes from. It comes from the word assize. And back in the days of early England, the king would appoint a committee of citizens to go around and actually assign to certain things a tax. It was an assessment. We assess you this much, etc. Called the assizes. The citizen committee that assesses their neighbors' taxes for the king. And so that's really where that comes from. Now, the way they decide it is on the basis of 3 different things. The retail price, an excise tax can be, you know, you've got tires, 10%, you see, added to the retail price. During the war, we had luxury taxes, jewelry, we have cigarette taxes. These are all excise taxes, and it's a certain percent assigned to the price itself. Then the rate of consumption for other things, consumption, and that's water, electricity, gasoline. They have excise taxes attached based on, you know, per gallon, wattage, etc. Now the privilege of doing business is an excise tax. Privilege of doing business. That's kind of interesting. Why should that be an excise tax? Well, here's the situation. If any of you saw Shane a long time ago, that kind of maybe date you, but here was a store, you remember, way out in the middle of a wilderness, a big valley. There's not much drop-in traffic, you know. Occasional wagon train go by. Now, if you have a city and the store is moved into the city, oh, you see your opportunities are tremendous. But now the city's got to protect you, have police protection, you've got to have fire protection, got the streets to pave. Everybody follow that? All right. So they put a tax on you for the privilege of doing business in town where you can make more money than out there in the wilderness to pay for the police, fire, etc. But you're paying for the privilege of coming into town, doing business. All right? Now, a sales tax, naturally, is what it says it is. It's a certain percentage that you have to pay on each sale of whatever it is, regardless of what it is. Just the fact that you sold something, you must add a certain percentage. The federal government hasn't used that yet, but I'm sure it's thinking about it. All right. Duties consist of taxes on imports. Imports. And that means goods coming in from outside the country. All right? Now, a tariff is also a duty on imports, but not just for raising revenue. See, ordinarily, a duty is the way that the founding fathers decided the federal government could raise all its revenue. Can you imagine that? That's what it says in the Federalist Papers. Federal government won't need hardly any more than it can make on imports. Duties on imports, unless it's a war. So they expected the federal government to be very modest in its requirements. Now, tariff is completely different. That's not just to raise money for the federal government. That's to protect our home markets, our home producers, I should say. So the blank there is on imported articles. Imported articles. Now, supposing, for example, our farmers, as you know, are the most efficient farmers in the world. One farmer can raise enough food for 59 other people, 57 to 59 other people. Over in Russia, they have to keep about half their population on the farms because of the problem of efficiency. All right, now our farmers have gained quite a substantial level of standard of living over a period of time. They've done pretty well. Now, income farmers or incomes, let's say food or agricultural products or meat, that has been produced by serfs or slave labor or very cheap labor, and so they dump it on our markets at a very cheap price, and our farmers to compete have got to become what? Serfs. They've got to go way down there in order to compete. And the founders said that's not right. Our local market belongs to our local producers. Our domestic market belongs to our domestic production. So they say to those people bringing in that food, you've got to pay a tariff so that the price will come into our country on a level at least as high as our domestic price. You follow that? All right, now, it became popular in Washington to abandon that policy some time ago and just open it up to a free world market in some goods. And you know what happened? It just absolutely drove many of our industries out of business. Electronics moved to other countries, didn't it? All right, that's not all. Other things, motion pictures and some other things started moving out because of our domestic policies. That needs to be evaluated very carefully because the founders said, your own people cannot stay in business and be part of the milieu of prosperity, etc., if you don't protect them from slave labor and unreasonable cheap labor. So that's something to think about. We've had a bad experience. Our mining has been badly hurt because of opening up our imports to all kinds of things. And meat, you see, our ranchers have a very difficult time competing with meat from Australia or Argentina because they're not allowed to use some of these special drugs, etc., that are thought to be cancer producing. That restriction is not on imported meat. And as a result, the beef can be fattened up. They get all kinds of additional weight on them by using some of these drugs that our own ranchers aren't allowed to use. A lot of things that we need to think this thing through very carefully. Keeping in mind, number one, America belongs to Americans. The market belongs to Americans. We want the other countries to do well, but not at the elimination, annihilation, or what should we say, demeaning of our own people. All right? And now, the sales tax, let's see, well, we got down here to tariff, didn't we? Capital B, the Congress can use taxes of various kinds to pay the debts of the United States. The debts. All right, because the Constitution set up a new government, a new form of government, they could have abrogated their past debts and said, oh, that was the old government. That's not who we are now. We got a whole new government, sorry. That's what they did in Europe all the time. You set up a new government, and that's your blank, where you start out from scratch. But our founding fathers said that is not only immoral and dishonest, we want to let the world know we are responsible and credible. And so they said we will assume our debts not only for ourselves, but also for the states. That was a fantastic thing to do. We'll talk about it more later in just a second. Number two is states. And that totaled $79 million in gold. There's an awful lot of money in those days. In gold, it still is. All right, number three. This willingness to assume past debts did much to establish credibility of the new government among Europeans. And the banks in Holland and Germany and elsewhere immediately agreed to loan the United States more money because they said, if you're willing to commit yourselves and your taxpayers to paying even your past debts, we can trust you for the future. And that's really what put us back on our feet. All right, now individuals should remember this too. The same rule applies. Capital C. The Congress can raise revenue to pay for the national defense. National defense. Now I want you to notice this. The founders are now going to say what they can raise taxes for. What can the Congress tax the people for? Well, to pay the debts and to pay for the national defense. When has the Congress provided an adequate defense? Only when it is sufficiently strong so that we'll deter any predatory nation from attacking us because of the risk involved, and that's your blank. Now today, this part of the responsibility of the Congress and the executive branch are under very serious criticism, and have been for many years, ever since World War II, because they have drained off from defense vast billions of dollars in order to provide for a very elaborate expenditure in politically popular social programs. Social programs. Now, the founders did want all of these social programs to be considered and taken care of, but not on the federal level. There is absolutely no authority for the federal government to be involved in doing good, taking up good causes. It's just not there. They said if you get it up that high, who's monitoring it? Who's watching for waste? A lot of other things, all right? Number two, they have been attempting to set up some kind of equality or parity with the avowed enemy that has said they will destroy the United States eventually. Now, that's very dangerous for this reason, that if you set up a SALT I or a SALT II, which is supposed to be parity, the enemy only has to make one significant technical breakthrough and they've got us. We must be in a sufficiently superior position, being a peaceful nation, so that no predatory nation will find it profitable to attack or keep up with us. And the most American people feel that's a very foolhardy position. And then, as a matter of fact, the Washington policy of appeasement resulted in them saying to Russia and now to China, we're going to give you billions in loans to buy our technology, our chemicals, our ball bearing factories, etc., which has greatly increased the war potential of the very people who said they're going to wipe us out. All right, now if friendship would cause them to mellow, as Washington kept promising us now during the last 30 years, we ought to have some signs of it. But no, here they are, you see, into Afghanistan, into their predatory policies of eventually taking over the world are creeping. There has been no mellowing. They have not mellowed, number 4, as Washington has indicated. And here we've built them up to this great strength where now in some categories the Soviet Union is 7-1 superior over the United States. And our people are very concerned. That's just in some areas. All right, capital D. In connection with the taxing power, it states that such funds can only be extended for the general welfare of the whole nation. Now, this should very clearly be understood by American people. These funds are not to be spent for individuals, special groups, or particular geographical regions. This clause was designed by the founders to be a restriction on the taxing power. General welfare and restriction. Now let me give you an example. They're just simply saying, if the Congress wants to appropriate money for a Navy, it mustn't be just a Navy for New England, or the East Coast now. They must provide an adequate naval defense for the whole nation if they're going to spend money, not for just one region. Everybody follow that? This means that if we farmers are in need, we got to work that thing out. We can't go to the government and say, would you appropriate a little for us, please, or us farmers, we're having a tough time. The answer will be, so are the grocers, and the jewelers, and the industrial workers. This is a tough time. And the founders said you cannot appropriate money for groups. Got to be something for everybody's national welfare, or you can't do it. Now, number 1, when Alexander Hamilton became Secretary of the Treasury, he hadn't been to all the convention, and he said, I think that, as I read that general welfare clause, I think that's a grant of power, a general grant of power. We can just appropriate money for anything, folks. Boy, tell you, Madison and Jefferson were up there immediately. They said that this is what would destroy limited government. You see, you don't have limited government if you've got a general grant of power, and that's your other blank, limited. Hamilton was immediately resisted by Jefferson and Madison. And they said, you didn't stay long enough at the convention, General Hamilton, if you had stayed, you'd have gotten the real intent of our intent. That was to restrict the taxing power to things that were only for the national welfare, not individual, group, regional welfare. And so that interpretation more or less prevailed all the time throughout the entire period up till about 1936. About 1936. That's your blank. Did you get Jefferson and Madison? Now 1936. Now the thing that changed it completely was a Supreme Court decision they must never forget, because it amended the Constitution unconstitutionally. It was called the Butler case. And in that case, we had a 5-4 decision in which the majority of the court said we are going to abandon Madison's view and the original founding fathers' view. We're moving over to the Hamiltonian position that Congress can appropriate money for anything that it feels is in the national welfare. We've never been the same since. All right, beginning in 1936. That immediately resulted in political looting of the Treasury and the taxpayer. Your blank is looting. Looting. That means unconstitutional, illegal, unlawful extraction and extortion from the Treasury, which has to be filled by the taxpayer of billions of dollars for various causes. All right. To give you some idea of what this has done to American economics, the United States budget in 1936 was $6 billion. How much is it now? Over $600 billion. See what that's done to our whole tax structure? Somebody else is deciding what to do with about 43% of your entire income. All right, $600 billion. That's A. And B, both congressmen and senators began campaigning on the basis that they had concocted wonderful plans which would bring more federal money to their respective states. See, that began to be the game. What can you dream up? What can you think up to get more federal money into our state? Now see, instead of limiting instead of limiting the federal government to the relatively few areas of responsibility outlined in the Federalist Papers, Congress began financing every good cause which offered an excuse for spending money in their respective states. All right, now President Lyndon Johnson came right out in the open with his great new program in which he said, we're going to take from the haves and give to the have-nots. We're going to take from the haves and give to the have-nots. All right. Now, the founders said, we set it up so that everybody would have equal protection of rights. And we absolutely forbade an equal distribution of things because you cannot have equal protection of rights if you start giving the government the power to start spreading things around. And furthermore, it's outside the authority of the people to delegate that kind of power to the government. Authority is your blank. Because if an individual did that himself, it would be a crime. That's your next blank. And he can't delegate to government something that would be a crime for him to do. All right? Now look at these guns up here on the screen. You see, I'm allowed to give the government authority to do anything I can do myself. Am I allowed to, if necessary, use a gun to protect my family and my life and my home? Am I authorized to do that? Sometimes people say, no, that shows how little we know about our inalienable rights. Because we've had a few judges who didn't know anything about American law start saying you couldn't protect your home with a gun. You can protect your home and your family as an inalienable right. It is your castle. And somebody comes through the door, some judges have said, well, he just came in to burglarize. You don't know whether he's going to hurt anybody or not. You don't have to, it's just like John Locke said, that man's operating outside the law and you treat him as an outlaw. And you're entitled to protect your home and your family from this outlaw because he's coming in here at the risk of his life, and he should know that, and every child in school should be taught it. You don't go breaking into people's homes. Well, anyway, I can delegate that to the police, can't I? Because I go to sleep at night. I want somebody to protect my home, my family, so I delegate that to the police. Is that all right? Sure, because I have the authority I could do it myself, but I want to go to sleep, so I delegate that to the police. I could stand out in front of the house with a little water hose, waiting for a spark to land on the roof all night, couldn't I? But can I delegate that to a fire department legitimately? Can I? Sure, and I do. Pay taxes, and I tell them, you fellows, please get your hose out. All right. Now, can I delegate to the police the authority to go over and take my neighbor's lawnmower? How about that? I can't do that? All right. It would be that'd be a crime for me to do it. I therefore can't delegate. Now watch what we've gone and done. We have done something that in an individual would be a crime. Now I want to give you an example of it. See, over here the Smiths. Now they got 2 cars. Over here the Joneses. They only got 1 car. I'm a compassionate man. So I go up in the middle of the night and I go over and I hotwire that car, 1 car, take it over here and give it to the Joneses. And they're so happy. They think that's very nice. And so they tell me that they appreciate that. And I go home and I sleep better. And in the morning, the sheriff comes and tells me, he's got a piece of paper here, calls me a car thief. I said, I am no car thief. They said, well, you were seen hot-wiring a car, taking it to a hideout. I said, no. The Joneses didn't have any car. Smiths had 2. I just took 1. Yeah, that's equal justice for all, you know. Well, he said, you'll have 2 to 3 years to think about that. This happens to be a felony, and it's car theft. When I get out of jail, I go over to those people and I say, if you'll elect me, I'm going to go and soak the rich. I'm really going to take it away from the rich. And I'm going to kind of distribute it among those in needy. Oh, do I get elected? You bet. I got elected. A lot of other people, too. I don't take the Smith's car. I just take some of their money and taxes. And then I say, let's see. They won't vote for me next time. But the Joneses will. But then again, I need more than just the Joneses vote. So I'm going to spread it out just a little around here, and they'll all get something for nothing. And does that elect people? You bet it has. It's worked for congressmen in both parties. All right, so this is why Harry Hopkins said, tax, tax, spend, spend, elect, elect. You see that works. All right, now that has done a lot of damage to us, because by destroying the rights of those people, destroying their equal rights, we actually opened up the floodgates so they could destroy anybody's rights. All right, now at this point we're going to pause, and we're going to continue this highly interesting part of our lesson, the 20 powers delegated to Congress by the states.